Hello, welcome, solidarity, everyone, and shalom, and one other thing, Viva Posadas. Oh, geez, we are going to have this meme, Posada gang low, communist aliens. So yeah, welcome Falcone, and welcome everyone else. So today we're going to answer a question. How in the world does a run-of-the-mill but very popular Latin American Trotskyist become the way that they are? Such an odd ideology surrounding UFOs, nuclear weapons, dolphin, like weaponizing dolphins, odd things like that. Where does this come from? Well, it seems to come from two places, and it comes from paranoia and trauma. Now, I'm going to sort of explain this, but, let's give a little bit of background to who Juan Posadas was, what was going on in his life, and what was going on in the Trotskyist movement, and sort of come to an understanding of why him and his followers took such a strong turn. So, Juan Posadas, who was not born that, he was born with a very Italian name. Here, it's going to be hard for me to pronounce, so let me go for it. He was born Omero Romulo Cristalli Frasnelli. That's not so bad. But he was known as the pseudonym as J. Posadas or Juan Posadas. Many revolutionaries of his age and of the 20th century had pseudonyms and things like that. So he was born in the slums as a young child to Italian immigrants. He was one of 9 children and lived in abject poverty his entire life. But he did have a saving grace. 2 things for him that were a saving grace. He was brilliantly smart and also a brilliant football player, soccer, as the Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, and Americans know it as. And he played for the youth organization for a soccer club and organization called River Plate, which is one of the biggest football institutions in Argentina, next to groups like the Boca Juniors and Newell's Old Boys and stuff. So he did have this opportunity, and he was able to help his family through his football skills. That's not the direction he decided to take in life. He got into, activism and working with Trotskyists. And he started getting into that after World War II and into the 50s. And he became very well known within the international Trotskyist community and what was at the time the unified Trotskyist institution. But in the 50s, there was the first split between the French turn, the entryists, and those who disagreed with it, the entryism. And they were against it. So they split with the Fourth International. A lot of Latin American organizations and many others, but it was really focused, like millions and millions of Trots in South America, Central America, the Caribbean, the Spanish-speaking world outside of Europe. And he became, Juan Posadas became a very high and respected figure within this Trotskyist international split away from the French turn. And they believed in having their own party and everything. It didn't believe in, compromising with bourgeois parties and elections and stuff. So they were very militant about that sort of thing. And at this time, they were very revolutionary. And I'll get to that in a minute. Funnily enough, the Posadists were the only Trotskyists to actually contribute to a revolution that succeeded. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So in the mid 60s, he was snubbed on leadership. And this was like the early 60s, actually, like 63, 64 of this uh, Fourth International split. And so he split. You know, this is a typical Trotskyist thing, right? They split, they split, they split. And he had his own group. But he was super well respected. And there were many, many Latin American outfits that went along with him, including the ones in Cuba, funnily enough. Um, and these Posadists in Cuba, um, you know, they were always aligned with him, but they helped contribute at the end of the 50s, and they were aligned with Posadas faction, which had not split at the time. In the Cuban Revolution, they had helped. They played a small part, and when they were officially Posadas, they were still allowed in the government. Now, it was whenever Posadas took his turn that that they were purged from Cuban politics. Now, why did he take this turn? What happens? Right now, he seems like a very run-of-the-mill Trotskyite that was popular. Well, what happened in the 60s in Argentina, coinciding with this time, was there was a military coup and junta that overthrew the liberal democratic government. And, you know, they did the dirty war. You know, that's what they're known for. And this lasted until the 80s. You know, one of their last dying gasps for power was the war over the Maldives, the Falkland Islands, as the colonizers call it. And so they took over. And of course, the first thing they do is crack down on leftists of all stripes. And at this time in Latin America, and especially in Argentina, and to this day in Argentina, Trotskyists are extremely popular. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of Trotskyists in Argentina, if not millions. Like, it's really many, many. And one of the leaders they arrested was this guy, Juan Posadas. And this is where the part of the story gets sad. He was tortured. He was tortured. They tried to get information from him, and he was tortured for years and years and years in prison. And he was out in the 70s. But he wasn't the same man as he was before. He was a broken man. But he still had his, you know, he was seen as someone who sacrificed himself, his life in prison for, you know, the Trotskyist movement, and they were proud of him. He came back out, and he started saying things like, we need to nuke half the population, like Thanos style, no joke. And he said this was the only way to save the world. And he started saying things like UFO and communist aliens will come and, you know, save us, and all sorts of conspiracy theories about weaponized dolphins, mind-reading dolphins and stuff. And this is when, you know, the Posadas movement fell apart. You know, just the hardliners stuck around. There was a hardline group in the UK that stuck with them even. And they started putting out, you know, a bunch of conspiracy theories and calling for, you know, extermination of half of the human billions. And I really think this came out of the trauma and persecution underneath the junta, and specifically on such an influential figure within his political realm, Juan Posadas, who was tortured to the point to where he was no longer mentally capable. He was no longer that intelligent Trotskyist that existed before. He came up with all these things, and you see people talking about Juan Posadas today. You know, they do the memes and everything. It's unfortunate what happened. And this is really the ideology. Posadism is the ideology of trauma. This is the ideology of people who were so traumatized to the point that reality for them was no longer, the material conditions in front of them, and that, in their minds, nothing that we could do with the situation that we had could ever improve it. It was a destructive thought. And this harkens me on to other destructive ideologies and how they're sort of tied to this paranoia, sometimes trauma or perceived trauma. And you see it manifest itself in many different ways. And it's usually not trauma on a mass scale. It's the trauma of an individual that will change their views on something. You look at a racist in America who said his grandpappy was beat up by that shit, by a person of color, and he hates them, blah, blah, blah. This is a paranoid state of mind. This is a state of mind where they focus on individuals and not, systemic problems. And it sort of leads to this destructive path. And I think Juan Posadas was so deeply and personally hurt and traumatized, and his mind was not there anymore. And these people felt so indignant to the fact of what had happened to him and their comrades within their movement, and just normal everyday people that were disappeared by this junta. It was a paranoia. It was a lack of trust in their fellow human that came from this. And so it led them to think like, well, we really need something else to save us. We need aliens to save us. We need to wipe out half the population. This Malthusian mindset that there are too many people. And this ideology of trauma isn't just exclusive to the Posadists, and it's not just exclusive to leftists, or it's something that transcends a lot of people. And the ideology of trauma doesn't always manifest itself in harmful ways. Black nationalism or indigenous nationalism are very much shaped by the trauma of their people. But the difference is that that's not the basis for what shapes how they believe. There's more to it than just that. And I think that, allowing personal trauma to affect how you see systemic issues, especially when you're so influential, that can have a detrimental effect on the organizations. And he essentially killed, all these Latin American groups that believed in him. And it's not his fault. It's really not. He was a victim. He was a man that was once intelligent, brilliant athlete, great speaker, great writer. Like, even if you're not a Trotskyist, like, Juan Posada is like, not, it's hard to hate him. He's like, Stalinist bureaucracy, blah, blah, blah. But he was also like, in the armed struggle, we can ally with these, national liberation groups and other communists and stuff. He wasn't, even though he split like a normal Trotskyist, he wasn't as bad as everyone thought. And his Trotskyist group actually contributed to the Cuban Revolution. And you can't say that about any other Trotskyist group. And so a based man in a cringe place can make all the difference. Amen. But yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to mention about Posada, because we always hear about what he believed, but where did he come from? He came from abject poverty, 9 siblings of an immigrant family. And then he had athletic skills, but then also he was tortured and traumatized for years. When he was finally released, he wasn't the same, and it produced this destructive ideology. So, I want everyone to, don't stop your Posadas memes, because Posadists are weird, and they still exist in some cases. But when it comes to Juan Posada, we have to look at, the context of why, where does this wild stuff come from? It comes from trauma. and paranoia and distrust. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I'm going to not be doing my pre-Shabbos stream this week. I'm going to take a break. I might be putting out something before that or after that. You know me, I'm pretty random about this stuff. Thanks for everyone who watched, and if you like it, give it a like. And if you're watching later, comment and let's talk about it. Let's do it. Yeah, nuke the world theory. Yeah, yeah, it's a destructive ideology, very much so. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate y'all so much. And if you have any suggestions, comments, critiques, jokes, whatever, leave a comment. And also, like, if you want to see me talk about some, weird movement in the left, I can usually talk about that stuff. So just ask me if you want me to mention someone. All right, thanks, y'all. Solidarity. Don't give up the ship.